Hello, everyone. Welcome to the IntelliCast episode 2. Today, I have a very special guest. I am joined by Shane to the side of me over here, if you're watching the video, who works with Huntress, one of our partners that we work with on a very often basis. And we're going to be discussing the Nist framework. We're going to be discussing some network security today. So Shane, do you mind giving yourself an introduction to the crowd?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the IT space for about 21 years. About 18 of those years I spent doing work at an MSP, really doing a lot of network, basically consulting. So I led a team of engineers who did basically the projects for implementations. And so I had a lot of experience over those years designing networks for different organizations and different verticals and seeing a lot of different environments out there. And that my background is heavy on the network side. And so I've kind of transitioned from being a guy that was doing network design and perimeter security and things like that, later moving on into endpoint security, which is what I'm helping out with over at Huntress from a kind of a sales engineering perspective, customer partner education and that sort of thing. And still some consulting, right, on security, even for us. So, but that's kind of me in a nutshell anyway.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you for joining us and helping us educate our client base. So we've done an overall view with our guests last month, excuse me, to talk about an overview of security. So we want to do a little bit more deeper dive into how we can protect ourselves and how our clients can protect ourselves and what to look out for in those cases. So what have you seen from the networking side standpoint as far as threat vectors, sophistications and issues as far as the network goes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always helpful to really have a conversation about current threat landscape, because 2021 is a very different from just a couple of years back, right? I mean, that the attacks have become way more sophisticated. There are these, systems and tool sets that the attackers are using that they continue to evolve, right? And so during their ransomware attacks and when they're making money, however they happen to be making that money, they're taking a part of that money and reinvesting it into those tools, right? And making those tools better, just like everyone on blue team, like the defenders of the networks are spending R&D time, right, making their products better. So it's kind of this cat and mouse game, right? And I think from my perspective, that the biggest thing is just the sophistication of the attack and their ability to basically bypass prevention. So there's a lot of tools out there that are very good, and they're needed, like your AVs and firewalls and things. They're very needed. And they are going to block most things, but they're getting much better at making their way past those and then trying to embed like persistence into environments and kind of stay dormant, right? And live there and do their research and figure out what data is important, exfiltrate data, right, encrypt data. And so because of that, the costs of the attacks have really gone up, right? So if you are the victim of a domain-wide ransomware attack, the average downtime these days it's like 19-20 days, right? And so that's a lot of time to be down, especially for a small to medium-sized business, right?
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, so it's you're talking about being down for 3 weeks, and that's you may not be making payroll, right? So they're very real concerns. It's a very real threat landscape, and it's very methodical. They're running a business now. It's not just people trying to be annoying, right? It's people out there trying to run a business and make money, right? And they're getting good at making money. So
and they can the data that they encrypt, if it is a ransomware attack, they can actually decrypt that data. Anything that looks like financial records and stuff like that, they'll easily pull that and then say, hey, you make X year, I want twice as what I was going to offer, because you make more money than I was guesstimating when I initially infected you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they'll even, if they're snooping around, they could even find your documents about like how much money you have in cybersecurity insurance, right? And then they can say, okay,
Yeah,
well,
that's a good point.
we'll just we'll just ask for twice that. They'll negotiate down, and we'll still get what we want, right? So
Yeah.
it can be they're getting very good at what they do, unfortunately for the rest of us. So, but yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a landscape that's constantly evolving. Um, and even those in the know are surprised on a day-to-day basis of how they got in to do things. Um, so from do you mind explaining what Nist is to those listeners?
Yeah, sure. And I've got a few slides on this, and that's usually easier to just kind of visualize it through the slides. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. We can kind of
Mhm.
talk through it a little bit here.
Sorry to those listening in your vehicles. Feel free to look
So
at the video on YouTube; they'll be there.
yeah, and for those of you on the podcast, I mean, definitely you can Google Nist cybersecurity framework, and you'll find all kinds of stuff.
Well, good
And
luck.
yeah, and you can also like Google MITRE. We'll talk about MITRE attack for a little bit as well. But on the screen here is basically the Nist cybersecurity framework, and that basically is broken down into these 5 layers, right? Identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And underneath those, I've kind of added a few, types of basically the products that would slot into those different layers of Nist, right? And so I find that Nist is a really good tool to use when you're really trying to visualize, okay, well, I know that I have, X, Y, and Z products. So what layers of Nist really do those products fall in? Am I covering these layers, or do I have gaps within this framework, right? And so this is like an example of what this is like the perfect example, right? This is like what 1% of companies in the world can afford to do, right? That if
Yeah.
you're Microsoft or you're Google or you're Amazon, you can do all these things, right?
Yep.
If you're the company out there, you're basically going to be picking and choosing strategically different products that are going to fill these layers, right?
Yeah, you want to get the most bang for your buck, and that varies depending on your business, what applications, and is your applications in the cloud? Is it on premises? Do you have files? You need to plug and play basically where stuff best fits to defend yourself.
Correct. Yeah. And that's what we really kind of refer to as really building your stack, right? And your stack is going to be unique to your business, and not every business, like you're saying, is going to be the same, right? So what we end up seeing typically is something that looks like this for most customers that we deal with, where they have some things that identify where they're managing their assets. They know what their assets are. Like if they're working with you guys at IntelliCast, you have an RMM tool, right? That's going to be doing some of that asset management for them, which is great. And then they're going to have next gen AV or AV, a firewall of some kind, DNS filtering, email filtering, and phishing training. And then they're also going to have some money that they're spending in recovery, which is really just your backup solution. If you want to get more sophisticated, like a DR site, right, that they would fail over to or something like that. And then the detect and respond is generally where we see a gap in most of the customers that we work with. And that's really simply because you do need security expertise there to effectively operate in that. And so that's really where you get your managed detection response tools. Huntress is a managed detection response tools. We have people that are actually doing threat hunting, right? And there's a lot of these tools on the market that do MDR. There's XDR tools, there's SIM SOCs, right, where they have actual people in the security operations center that are actually analyzing that data that they're getting, right? And so that's typically why we see that gap, is it can be more costly. Those tools can be a little bit more costly for people to use. And so you sometimes have to be strategic about, where you're spending your budget, and, where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, and try to do something within each of these stages that will at least give you visibility there, right?
Yep.
And so, the other thing that we'll talk about a little bit later as we focus on different protect layer, the actual protect layer, is what what things kind of slot in here and what things do we find as important? What things have I seen in my career has been important, especially in 2021, for customers to be using it at these different layers. And so we'll get into that a bit. The other thing that we typically look at too is like the MITRE framework. Do you have any other questions about this in particular, Kyle? Are you good?
Yeah, I think we're good on this one.
Cool. So the MITRE attack is really another one that, and it can be an eye chart, and so I don't want to scare everyone off. But really, if you just focus on that top row there, it's really the anatomy of an attack, right? So what's really cool about MITRE is it's the MITRE as an organization has analyzed a lot of these domain-wide ransomware attacks and that sort of thing, and they've really just kind of put together an attack flow. And a lot of these attacks, they follow this pattern. And so it's cool because you can then look at your tool set and say, okay, well, do I have tools that will help me mitigate in these different areas, right? And so you can look at initial access and execution. And, that sort of thing is really where your next-gen AV, your firewalls come into play, where they're trying to prevent that initial access into your network and executing of code. Persistence is something that, Huntress as a product, really, that's where our focus is. That we're looking for those backdoors where people have put into the network so that they can kind of come and go as they please undetected. That's really what persistence is about. And then a lot of your like privilege escalation, defense evasion, credential access, those are really things you need, like those endpoint tools on. Those are things that happen on a workstation where they're basically just trying to evade detection. They're trying to escalate the privilege so they can do administrator level activities. Discovery, lateral movement, collection of data, that's all really where your detect and response tools come into play, like your SimSOCs, Huntress to a certain degree, things, any kind of MDR, that sort of thing, where you're looking, it can also be your, application layer filtering on your firewall, picking up something, right? Or your, those IDS, IPS feature sets of the firewall, picking up some of that stuff, right? And obviously what they're trying to get through this attack framework is they want to get to exfiltration, they want to get to impact, where they're stealing data, they're encrypting data, and popping some sort of ransom and collecting money, basically, right?
Yeah.
So, that's kind of MITRE and Nist in a nutshell. The nice thing about these tools is they're really there so you can identify what your gaps are in your security posture, right? And then try to fill those gaps. If you don't have the budget today, think about your budget next year, right? It's always good to start thinking ahead and figure out, hey, what products am I going to bring to bear to try to get more of these gaps covered and be really moving in the right direction, in other words.
Yeah, one of the key features or one of the key requirements of security is a layered approach. You can always go back to the Shrek quote that ogres are like cakes. They have so many different layers to them.
Yeah.
As Donkey says, like onions. But it's there's always flaws and ways around different layers, and so you're building a defensive setup, and you have to layer your defenses, because if you just put all your money into one, that's still an easy way to get through.
Sure.
And it just may require more effort than
right.
previous.
There are plenty of tools on the market where the marketing says, hey, we'll stop everything. It just doesn't really exist, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. It'd be nice to have one of those.
Yeah, it would be. But you definitely need that layer. Each tool works differently. Like at Huntress, we have our own set of indicators of compromise, the things that we're looking for, right? But another product's going to have a different set, right? And so the more you can bring multiple sets of those indicators of compromise to bear, like the chances are higher that you're going to find something, right?
Yeah. So if we using the information we've just discussed and moving into the network itself, as far as the first level of protection is generally associated with the firewall. It's the face of your company to the internet, and it allows things in or out based on the settings it provides or the licensing it provides. there are a plethora of firewall availabilities. There are a plethora of tools that a firewall can do. You can do DNS filtering. You can do IP, intrusion protection or intrusion detection. You can basically lock down your entire company and segment them from one single device. Now, like I said, it's a similar to a layered approach, but it's handled by one device, and that's not foolproof. As with your experience, what do you think are some of the most important things to have enabled in working on a firewall from a security standpoint?
Yeah, so their firewalls at a base level are just a stateful. In other words, they're just looking at traffic coming and going, and just making sure it's on the right port protocol, that sort of thing, right? The things that are more effective today are really what's referred to as that next generation feature set, more of the application layer filtering, where you can actually identify different applications moving in and out. And your IDS, intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention systems, where they're looking for basically shady behavior, right? If they're looking at that network traffic and trying to figure out, okay, could this traffic be indicative of something malicious or not, right? And alerting you about when they see things like that. And that's really what I feel like today is really the most important piece of a firewall, because it's really that, they've gotten really good at hiding their activity once they do get into your network. And a lot of this is egress type traffic where they're doing some sort of command and control, right? Back to the mothership, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And they're getting their taskings of what they want that agent that they've placed or that foothold to do for them, right? And so that might be snoop around your network and find the cool data that they want to exfiltrate. And so so having that visibility at the firewall as traffic is coming and going through there to the internet and out to the bad guys, that's really what is important, I think, today.
Yeah. So the way a network is structured, there are IP addresses, which are basically your home address, but the world doesn't work in numbers, which is what an IP address is made up of. So a DNS, basically, it's called domain name system.
Domain name systems, yeah.
So I can guess myself there for a second. And so it converts all those fancy numbers into human readable words. So instead of going to 1.2.3.4, you go to google.com, and it's much easier to translate words instead of trying to remember how to get to Google, which may have more than one way to access Google. So you reach out to the domain name server, and it tells you where to go. It routes your computer. Now, these are also used for nefarious purposes. What are some things that you have seen that utilize this threat landscape for DNSs?
Yeah, DNS, and there can be built-in DNS filtering on firewalls and things like that to help out, but there's also other products like OpenDNS or Umbrella, things like that are doing DNS filtering for you when one of your workstations attempts to resolve an address, right? And so that address those services are gonna basically validate that the DNS that's being returned is not something that's on a bad list, right? Or a known list of compromise type systems, because many times these attackers will use DNS to help obfuscate their services, right? And so I think it used to be that tools like that, the DNS filtering, were really used for just to prevent people from going to those not safe for work type sites, right?
Yeah.
But now it's even more important, because it's really not only that, but you're also getting that kind of that scan and approval of the sites that they are resolving, that they are legitimate sites and not something that's tied to some sort of botnet or something like that, right? That they're trying to redirect them back out to for a malicious purpose.
Yeah.
And there, DNS can be used today in even more nefarious ways. A lot of those tools, like Cobalt Strike, that they have methods of command and control that actually operate completely over DNS. And so that's one of the ways that they're actually hiding that command and control traffic, because every network has DNS traffic on it, right? Like for a network to function, we use DNS, right?
Yeah.
And that's true internally, that's true to internet facing. And so it's one of those ways that they like to hide, right? And so that's yet another way that those filtering services can help you there on the DNS side.
Man, I didn't think about that, to be honest. Disguising yourself as just information traffic, which is standard everywhere, is really clever.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest ways that I understood as far as getting access to your system is via spam or phishing. What things can we do to help protect ourselves from that?
Yeah, there's many mail filtering solutions out there that will help with that. There's no real foolproof thing, because obviously phishing is still basically the number one way these attackers get access to an organization. They'll send a very, very convincing looking email and someone will inevitably click on it, and that's what really establishes that element of persistence, typically initially, right? And from there, they can pivot on that machine into different elements of persistence, or they can move laterally and do some other things. And so it is very important. And it really comes down to having those tools like your spam filtering services, in addition to user training, right? And so that the user training, like a KnowBe4 or something of those, there's many of them out there that will do user training where you can actually send some, fake phishing emails and figure out if any of your users click on those, and then you can kind of do some more targeted user training with those users, right? And so I think that helps a lot. It ultimately, social engineering is a big deal, right? And it's something that any one of us could fall for, even people who who work in security, right?
Yeah.
Some of those emails are extremely convincing, and a lot of times they attempt to make those look like they're coming from people who at your organization, right? But they're not. And so I don't know how many times I could tell you I've got emails from Kyle, our CEO, that's not Kyle, but many times they'll try to take advantage of that boss at the organization, because people may not question what he's asking them to do, right? And that's kind of what they're doing there, and what they're trying to that's the social engineering bit they're trying to achieve, right?
Yeah.
But
so once they get into the network, obviously everything's connected, right? Everything internally, if you have access to, if you can get to the internet, you're on your internal network. As far as the overall network design, and this is something that's, that I know you've done for years, but it's also something that's also now evolving greater than it has recently, due to how most people are moving from on-premise servers to cloud-based servers. So it's becoming less of a required skill set and more of a nice to have skill set. And when businesses are setting up, or you're evaluating a network infrastructure, how does the network design work for or against you as far as an incident?
Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, networks can be designed, ultimately you can design a network to, first and foremost, you're trying to fulfill the needs of the organization, right? You want operationally the network to work for you.
Yeah, right.
But on top of that, you have the security piece, right? And so that is also just as important. But you have to think of that piece as more risk mitigation, because a lot of the things that you're going to do there may make it more difficult for you to manage that network, right? Because it may add some complexity. But in the event of an incident, if you have a network that is, let's just say, like completely flat, you can think of it like a warehouse, right? You can walk into a warehouse, you can look all the way across the warehouse, you can see whatever's going on across the warehouse, you can walk up to anything in that warehouse and have access to it. And that's kind of what a flat network looks like. From an operational perspective, it works great, but from a security perspective, if you segmented that network, it would be safer, right? So, and like you were saying, now a lot of customers, it used to be that you had servers in-house, but now people are starting to put those in the cloud environments, right? And so there is this natural segmentation that happens there, because they're not all in the same building with the rest of your people and their workstations, right? So there's an element of that segmentation that's happening just because of how networks are continuing to evolve today. But I would say still, one thing that is important there is like Wi-Fi segmentation, right? So you want to have your Wi-Fi network on its own VLAN. You want to have your guest network segmented in a way. Ideally, in my opinion, you want your guest network completely physically separate, right? But there are ways to segment that logically and still keep it safe as long as you're passing it through a firewall, right? And so, but in my mind, that's kind of what comes to the front of my mind when it comes to just that general network design, is really, making sure that, when someone does get into your network, the more you can do to make them jump through more hoops, right? to see everything, the better off you're going to be, because that's going to slow down their advancement, right? And every time they have to pivot or do something to get around one of those things, like if you're passing different VLANs through a firewall, every time they try to if they have to pass a security device, right? That's an opportunity for a threat hunter to identify that traffic and to find that intrusion, right? And so that's kind of what makes a difference in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. So talking about Wi-Fi specifically, obviously there's a plethora of, Wi-Fi companies, Wi-Fi, it's huge. Being able to walk around with a laptop and to be able to not be able, be able to continue to work without having to be chained to a desk or something is something the modern, businesses are fully on board with. So what are some things that we that need to be looked at or checked, or some best practices that users could do for as far as Wi-Fi goes?
Yeah, I mean, Wi-Fi is it's one of those, it's really nice to have. You can walk around. The problem is typically, unless you do some network heat mapping where you can see where your signal extends to, you don't really know. You're basically opening your network up to potentially someone in your parking lot, right? Or someone in the office suite next to you. And so it's always good, in my opinion, to do like a wireless site survey is one of those things where you can use a tool to basically walk around the space, see the signal strengths. And if you're extending that wireless signal, outside of your environment, there are ways that typically you can reduce that signal strength to kind of bring it back in, right? And so that someone couldn't just be sitting on the street outside your office building in a car trying to hack into your network, right? So those are things that are good to do. As a user, you always want to make sure that, hey, typically customers have a guest network and an internal network. Many times users will move to a guest network because they want to do something that's personal to them, right? And they don't, maybe they limit what sites they can get to on their internal network, but they'll bounce over to like the guest network, right? To go and maybe do their personal banking or whatever, right? And so
hopefully they should. They're not being, because that just for anyone maybe listening, that's tracked on everything you do. So if you log into your personal bank details, that stuff it may not be easy to get, but it's still available to get. So
correct. Yeah. But if they do that, they may, the next time they walk in the building, your machine may automatically connect to the guest network instead of the internal network, right? And then you're obviously broadcasting things on that network that someone could use against you, things like that.
Yeah,
so
you may not be able to actually work if you're on the guest network, and you may think something's wrong, and then that could be a help desk ticket to our team to rectify. Which it's just one of those things that is common enough to mention, hey, just double check what network you're on before you actually begin to work for the day.
Yeah, for sure.
Wi-Fi, I like Wi-Fi. It's fun. But yeah, it can be an easily accessed point. Even if I take my laptop and, in the modern workday, go to Starbucks for a couple hours to, be able to not be in meetings, and then be able to sit down and have a good uninterrupted work time and, have a cup of coffee while I'm at it. What are some things that our users can look at when doing, even on home Wi-Fi, accessing corporate data like that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of companies still use VPN, right? VPN is one of those things that it works great. It's one of those things, again, from an operational perspective, it's very functional. It allows them to get to their data that's back on the network, right? But it can also be very dangerous, right? If things aren't properly secured across VPNs, if access isn't limited, that user is in a different environment that is going to be way less secure than their corporate environment at Starbucks, let's just say, or even at their home, right? So, that's where companies have to be cognizant of if they're allowing users to establish VPN, let's make sure that that they're only allowed to send and receive traffic over just for the things that they need to do, right? And kind of lock that down a bit. There are other methods like a properly secured terminal server or Citrix or something like that can allow people, in my opinion, access is a little more securable, right? Where it's not a direct pipe open. They're just really remote controlling a session that's already inside the network. And honestly, typically, it's a little more responsive because they're not passing this larger amounts of data across a wireless connection, at Starbucks and anyway, they're remote controlling a machine that's somewhere else. So, and that can be so. And there's all sorts of methods for that, for those remote access. It's a big deal these days. Where I saw it is kind of, when everyone, because of COVID, when everyone started having to work from home abruptly.
Yeah.
That's what most companies did was they immediately, most firewalls already have that capability baked in, right? We already paid for that. Let's just turn on the VPN and let's let people go home and work, right? and they did so in a quick manner. And from my experience, most of the time when that happened, it wasn't in a manner that it was properly secured, right? It was kind of a quick and dirty. We got to get these people working from home because they need to be productive, right? And so that's something I think is to really look out for there. If you're on any public Wi-Fi, to be honest, seeing the things that I see in my job, I don't get on public Wi-Fi.
Me either.
I will use a hotspot. I'll use my iPad as a hotspot, or I'll use my phone as a hotspot, right? So that I'm not just joining like a public Wi-Fi network, because there's many attacks that can be done over an unsecured public Wi-Fi network.
Well, even a secured one that's passwords freely given out. I can sit on a network and just look at everyone's traffic. Like it's available to me because I have access to the network. It's not something that's hidden. It's the flat network, right? Everything is broadcast to me, and I see you logging into your work. I see you logging into your bank. I see you logging into Facebook. I mean, it's very scary.
It is,
but it's very convenient.
It is. And when you're at the airport and you're waiting on a flight, or you have nothing else better to do, you want to jump on, right? It's easy to just get yourself in trouble, I think. So
yeah, very true. So as far as making sure, so there's a lot of things you can do to protect yourself and to identify risks. We offer a risk assessment, which is based off the Nist framework that we utilize for our client base. So if you're interested, let us know. We have certain plethora of tool sets, and some of the ones that we generally recommend for some of our regulatory clients is what we call the SOC SIM. So Security Operations Center is generally a bunch of people looking at data that's collected via logs. So what do you think, how beneficial do you think a SOC and SIM is in this day and age?
I think for those regulatory clients, they can still be effective. The thing about the SIM is it's just a log aggregator, really. And you may be capturing some network traffic from different points within a network. If we're talking about classic, SIM. Yeah. And it generates a lot of noise, right? And so if you don't have the personnel with the expertise to really interpret all that noise and figure out what's important, chances are you're not getting your value there, right? So it's important to have those properly trained people to really be examining those logs. And moving forward, I think what we're seeing now is a lot of SIMs are introducing an endpoint piece of software, right? That they're not only, it used to be that SIMs they would have different little points on the network that they would have listeners, right? Or, you would be pushing logs from firewalls and different network infrastructure devices to them. And you may be having them capture data at the egress at the firewall or something like that, so that you could have that data. But with everyone working from home now, and we're a way more distributed workforce than we've ever been in the past. That becomes a little less effective unless they have that endpoint piece, right? Where you've got an endpoint agent that's running on each workstation. So when that workstation is at home or that workstation's at Starbucks, you're still getting some telemetry, right? From what's going on that network and at that machine. So they're typically a heavy lift. It takes a lot to set those SIEMsocks up. They're moving in that direction of more cloud-based SIEMsock, where it is an endpoint just reporting back to a cloud. That makes things a lot easier. And it's similar to kind of what we've been doing at Huntress for like 5 or 6 years, where we're not looking at the same set of data as a SIEMsock would. We're looking at a different data set, but it's similar where we're focused, we're transmitting that data set up to us, and then we're threat hunting within it, right? And a lot of those cloud-based SIEMsocks will do that, and it takes a lot of burden off the end customer on setup and configuration and tuning and that sort of thing. But they are a heavy lift. I mean, if you're using them correctly,
they collect a lot of data.
Yeah, it's a lot of data, and it can be overwhelming if you're not properly really trained, right? And there can be elements that you can bring to bear with automation to help lighten that lift, but it's still a lot of data, so.
Yeah. So that primarily covers just about everything we were discussing on. Is there anything you want to leave our audience with?
I would say ultimately, again, refer back to the Nist, try to fill those gaps, right? Because I think for me, a key takeaway is really, attackers only have to be right once to get into your network, right? But once they're in your network, every action they take is an opportunity for someone to detect that and to realize that they're there, right? And that's what they don't want. And so the more layers you can add there, and the more tools you can bring to bear, right? And to really identify, people will get past prevention. Prevention being next-gen AV, firewalls, that software-based solutions, they will get by those. We see it each and every day, and we wouldn't be a company at Huntress if that didn't happen, right? There's tools out there that can help you identify on that detect and respond, in those detect and respond layers of Nist. Hey, there's someone that has bypassed my prevention and they're actively moving around in my environment, right? And that's really the most, in my mind, the most critical piece, where you need something to be able to detect that, right? And because those attacks tend to be the attacks that lead to those 21 days of downtime, those $1 million ransoms, all the stuff you see in the news, that when an attacker has the time to just sit in your environment undetected, right? And do whatever they want to do for 90 to 100 days, right? They can outlast your backup cycle. So you can restore, it doesn't matter. They're in your backups, right? They can exfiltrate whatever day they want. So even if you don't want to pay the ransom, they'll sell your data on the black market, right? So they'll make their money somehow. So the key is, right, identifying when they're trying to do those pivots and they're trying to move around and have tools in place to detect that. And that's really where you're going to save yourself, potentially millions of dollars, potentially your business, right? If you're down for 21 days as a small business,
long time.
You might be starting over, right? I mean, that's it's a long time. So, again, that's kind of what I would leave people with is it's, if you have the tools, it's not something, if you have those tools in place, then you don't spend your days wondering if there's someone there, right? You've got a pretty good idea that activity is not going on, and you can sleep better at night, right? So.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Shane, for joining us today. I appreciate you giving us your time and availability to help us educate our clients better.
No problem. Happy to be here.
As always, we are available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Music as soon as everything gets done. So Thank you guys for listening. You have a fantastic day.
All right. Catch you guys later.